Hello, welcome to Self-Generated. My name is Steve. I am the host and creator of this podcast, and you have come across the 4th official episode. This is the first episode that's going to be available after launch. If you're on our Patreon, you're hearing this one early. I'd like to thank you for hanging in there, and I really hope that you've hung in there and you're not jumping in here because that will be tough. The long story short version, though, is that I'm just a regular guy. I don't have any special access or privilege. I'm not claiming any special authority. I'm talking about a handful of frameworks: active inference, embodied cognition, extended mind. And instead of these just being funny, complex little things that you can sound smart bringing up in a conversation, I feel that they're genuine ways to explain and look at how we actually work, our consciousness, our interactions, our emotions, everything. And that this understanding, not this highfalutin being able to do the math, but just this simple philosophical walkthrough, was the starting point for me to be able to turn from being a complete piece of shit to being a functioning, loving human being again, without gimmick, without having to bring anybody else down, and empowering me to bring other people up. And that's the whole point of this podcast, is we're going to try to explore some ideas. Some of them may conflict with what you already believe to be true. And I'm not here to make you feel bad about it. I think it's disgusting to empower oneself by belittling other people. I think that's awful. I do not want to do that. I've suffered that. I want you to feel comfortable looking at ideas that are counter to what you believe. And fundamentally, even if you don't believe anything I say, if people can gather the ability to hold on to a conflicting idea that's uncomfortable, be able to analyze it, look at it from different angles, talk about it, and put it back on the shelf without any turmoil, then this has succeeded. You have succeeded, I have succeeded, and that's a win in and of itself. And some people are going to need that tool in order to go over the next couple ideas, which is prehistory, where humans came from, civilization, and what that means for us. And I'm going to be looking at that through the lens of active inference as a notion of how we work, extended mind, and embodied cognition. Basically, what I'm saying is that the human history that you and I know is only a small swath of actually where humans came from, where you and I came from. You and I are the last link in a long chain of human breeding familiar relations for literally hundreds of thousands of years. If there was a break in the chain, you would not be here. So your chain is unbroken. If you have children, you have a link on the other side of the chain. I have stepchildren, so they're not my biological link, but my rearing them and perpetuating them is continuing the chain. And that is one of the stories and one of the frameworks, one of the ways I want us to sit and take a look at that. Because we are far more related, interconnected. We're meant to be alone. That's not a weakness. That there's a huge part of what it is to be human that is very obvious by looking at our genetics, how we're interconnected with the world, how you and I are actually far more related and far more similar than dissimilar than the world and the views that we look at might tell us. And there's something to that. And that the empowerment one can get from seeing through all of these stories and frameworks that already exist to see the truth is something else. But that's what we're going to try to do. Now, as I said earlier, and you're probably well aware, I'm not a media guy, I'm not an expert, but I am going to put up information on the screen. If you're listening to this on the podcast version, feel free to check the show notes, but the visual version on YouTube is kind of a meandering visual conversation in order to try to give you a few little angles to continue your search, to reinforce and to check and to verify, and see if what I'm saying is true. So I'm going to be talking about arbitrarily in this episode, the last 100,000 years. What I mean by arbitrarily, I'm just picking a date. That human beings have been around biologically as we are anatomically for at least 100,000 years, probably more. What do I mean by that is that we're the same species. Those humans of 100,000 years ago, though psychologically different than us, I'm not saying that they're fundamentally different than us. They just are living in a different environment. They've modeled a different world. That if we were to do something like a very interesting thought experiment and do some acts of immorality. When we go back about 100,000 years and you decide to get a little freaky with one of them, in theory, that could produce a child, meaning that they're not a different species. Just like our ancestors interbred with the Denisovans. If you're an Asian descent, you probably have some of their DNA. I'm of European descent, so I have Neanderthal DNA. These guys were different species, but they were close enough where they could interbreed. I'm talking about that it's not even that far apart, that we are of the same species. And then if you go back in that 100,000 years and say you didn't decide to get freaky with them, but you decide to pick up a kid and you bring him back to our current time. And if anybody steals this for a Fox, some type of TV show, make it good. Right? I don't care if you steal it. Just don't fucking make shit. Anyway, sorry, I digress. The idea is that once you get that kid, probably have to put them into a bubble, because if you didn't, they would die from COVID-25 or whatever other pathogens that they are not used to. But that still fundamentally, this person in this bubble would grow up, be able to learn language, be able to do anything that you and I would be able to do, be able to be pretty much anything. What I'm saying, this is a person, a human being. They might have a little bit of an ethnic look. They might look a little physically slightly different. And I use the term ethnic. They might be a little shorter, but nothing fundamentally different. This is not a human. They're capable of making the same milestones. They're genetically similar. And that's one of the first things we're going to have to go over is genetics for those that are not familiar. Now, when I say DNA, do you know what it stands for? DNA is the street name for deoxyribonucleic acid. Basically, it's these 4 nucleotides that pair up very simply, pretty much 1 billion times over, in this simple double helix pattern with these base pairs, essentially is the blueprint for all life on Earth. Yeah, hold on to that for a second, because some people forget this part, that I know I'm talking about prehistory and how we're all related and kumbaya and all that, and people have a tendency to roll their eyes, but we, as in human life, is all related to other life on Earth, albeit distantly, but we are related. That's one of the first frameworks we're going to have to try to get through. Now, DNA, if you're uninitiated, I'm going to leave some links. There's some basic information there, but the vast majority of us, this is not back when I was a kid in the late 80s, early 90s, especially I would like to reference the OJ case. OJ Simpson was found innocent, even though he had DNA evidence. Well, he was tried in a time that didn't have every other show on any network being a police drama that relied heavily on the tropes of DNA. And to a point where the ideas and focus on DNA has changed the criminal justice system to the point where people actually get off where they would have been probably convicted prior because they didn't have DNA evidence. There's a certain level of expectation and certainty for DNA evidence to be present, that it is flipped in our expectations of how we look at DNA in the world. You or I could walk into any number of different types of stores, Walgreens or Target or Walmart, or order online our own home DNA test with a couple spits and a little bit of postage. We can send it off and have our genome, have access to our genome, which we can then take and move around to various services to look at our genetic likelihoods, or percentage likelihoods of genetic disorders and diseases, if that actually means anything. Our propensities to do certain things, again, if that means anything. And then moreover, to follow our actual ancestry to see where our ancestors came from, because our DNA shows where it has come from, up to and including our ancestors and our other cousins on this world. For example, if I said that you and I are genetically similar to a chimpanzee in the somewhere between 96 to 99% range, some people look down upon that. They roll their eyes. They go, how can you put a human and a chimp side by side and say they're 96% similar? Well, it's also, if you're a dog or a cat, you're in the 80s to 90% similar. If you're a cow, it can be 80%. It can be 60s, 70s for a multitude of other animals. It can be 25% genetically similar to rice. That sounds kind of odd for the uninitiated, but it does make sense if you understand that we, you and I, are not only the long chain of humans, but we're a long chain of life, and that we are all fundamentally related. And that if we look at these differences, these big differences we think amongst ourselves, they're nothing in the DNA. They're fractions of a percent between you and I. Race, gender, ethnicity, age, even disabilities, these are fractional differentials in what it is to be human. The main difference we experience is what society tells us. It's not the actual humanity that is different. And that is a core of what we're going to be exploring. That is a big part of the idea, is that this idea of human exceptionalism, that we are above and beyond our fellow nature, that we are something different, when we are not as different as one might think if you look at it through this way. You and I are not nearly as different as one might think, and that what actually makes us us. It really isn't. And one way to think about it when it comes to other animals, I like to describe to people is that if I were to put this chimpanzee or your cat next to you and you go, man, how can I be that much similar to this thing? It's so different. Think about it. It's like Legos. We're made of the same stuff. We have hair, eyes, we smell, we breathe, we sit, we stand, we have bones, we eat, we defecate, we fornicate, we play, we have hair, we make actions, we interact with our environment, we interact with ourselves and other animals. Sometimes we hunt, sometimes we hide, sometimes we swim. We do all sorts of things behaviorally that are very similar. We are literally made of a different conglomerate of the same stuff. The chemicals that affect humans, dopamine, serotonin, and these other things, are not necessarily the liquid embodiment of these feelings. They're functions of how organisms like us work, and they work a little different in different animals, but they're there. These cells, these proteins, all of these things, the vascular system between us and a banana needs to be able to move liquids around. We need to be able to move blood and other liquids around. These fundamental systems work in the same fundamental ways. We are built of the same stuff. We're built on the same hardware. It's different rigging, different setups. It's far more universal than one might think. If you think of a limb, you think of your arm, your leg. You have one big bone between, like, say, your hip or your shoulder and your elbow and your knee. Then you have your two bones, and then you have many bones. And this is repeated over and over again across the animal kingdom. If I were to put up a picture of embryos of various animals at the early stages and as they develop, if I remove the names from them initially, without knowing, it would be very difficult to be able to discern them from one another. Because fundamentally, we come from very similar processes. We are not completely different. The need for us to be completely different is more to facilitate the current narratives that we need to run society than are actual reflections of the truth. That's a bit of a bite, but I believe that is fundamentally true, and one of the big hurdles that we kind of have to be able to at least be aware of and acknowledge, because if we ignore it, we're going to run into it, and we're not going to know how to deal with that error signal of what it's saying to us because we don't know what it is. It's that. It is what it is. It's okay. We can move on from that. Let's see if this stuff is true, and then we can circle back. And now a brief moment to acknowledge our non-existent sponsor. Fed up with feeling like an outsider, adrift in a sea of chaotic ideas and people? Then maybe it's time to come inside and join the party. Which party? What party? That's the best bit. It doesn't matter. Whichever you join, you're right, the other guys are wrong, and their stupidity is clear against your truth. Left, right, middle, your true meaning and purpose, with a built-in world to reinforce it, is right at your fingertips. Join the party today and make yourself feel better by keeping us in power. And now remember, only you collectively can perpetuate this. It can't look like democracy without the appearance of choice. Now with more diversity. And now back to our show, currently in progress. But that fundamentally, when it comes to DNA, what it shows us is that we are far more similar than dissimilar. You and I are fractions of percents different. Most of these things that we think of as races, these big differences, are fundamentally not true. They're narrative. They help facilitate narratives versus explain reality. Our similarities to other animals, how we can interact with other animals, is because we have very similar ways of working because we're of the same stuff. The fact that we have not the same level of consciousness, it's not the same exact consciousness, but we have consciousness. There's something to be your cat and a dog and all the other animals out there. And there's something to it so much so that we can interact with each other, even though we do not have similar frameworks of language and culture and the things society give us. And we probably did that for a lot longer than we did, or we've been around as civil creatures, as it were. And that these are uninitiated ancestors, our uncultured ancestors. There is not this evidence of savagery and all this other stuff that would lead one to believe that civilization alone changed us from being monsters to being what we are today. We weren't the same exact psychological creatures. No, that'd be silly to say. But we weren't fundamentally different in a way that you couldn't say they're human. That we should be able to regress to them intellectually as they should be able to rise to us. There's nothing, what I'm suggesting is there's nothing biologically preventing that. And that is the key part of this story. That is the most important part, is that for 20 times of our human history, we have been human working together, and we conquered the world against real no bullshit monsters. And that's what we're going to go over in this next chunk, is that actual 100,000 years of human prehistory, what the fuck we did, where we came from. And why I want to stress that is because I think that's magic in and of itself. I think that is awe-inspiring. I think that is amazing. I think it helps make sense of a lot of what we are more today than the stories we tell. And I think it's downright rude and fucked up to disavow that actual truth of where we came from. Because I think that empowers us. We don't need a bunch of additional narratives and layers of bullshit to try to make that work. It's just true. It's just true if you're willing to see it. I'm going to leave a link in the show notes that goes over radiocarbon dating and thermoluminescence and dendrochronology. Those are the three big ticket names on how we date things, how we determine that something has been around for X amount of years. But it's also really dry, and my recordings of it were kind of janky. So I want you to have reference to that so you can see that, again, I'm not just pulling this from my backside because this is convenient to my narrative. There's a real reason to look at these studies, these ideas, this framework as genuine, as most likely being a good explanation for where we came from, how we worked, or at least more evidence as to a different nature, how we came about to being what we are today. And that, as I had said, or I'm not sure even if I had said, we've been around more than 100,000 years. I arbitrarily picked 100,000 years. I was just doing that because there's more evidence and it's just kind of more straightforward. And that the last 100,000 years is the most formative of our prehistory. And that humans lived in small family groups, tribes, throughout Africa for a very long period of time. Animals that would be very similar to humans, Homo erectus, were around. And not only that, they populated the world as well. Or somewhere around 100,000 years ago, when we started to move out of Africa as human beings, we ran into other cousins, other maybe grandparents in Homo erectus, depending on how you look at it, where we came from. But we're seeing other hominids, other humanoid and human-like animals, other cousins, Neanderthal. I have Neanderthal DNA. My family is from Europe. If you are from Asia, you might have Denisovan DNA. These other guys that were out there, these men and women, these other creatures, as we like to call them from history, were sentient. They would have rights in modern era. But they were lacking something that made humans different. that made humans the victors. But what we like to act like is that it's something special, divine, or that something mechanical, more brain matter, a particular slight genetic edge, pattern of edges that gave us an advantage. But it's not just a little bit more brain matter. It's not just these simple things. We used to think of Neanderthal as being just the absolute pinnacle of caveman, smash, smash, right? And old ideas of bashing the woman over the head and bringing her back into a cave. Those are actually from turn of the century art and movies more than actual scientific fact. That we assume that humans were these savage Conan the Barbarian type of creatures prior to the genesis of civilization, prior to the saving grace of civilization and all of its trappings and organizations that are required to make it go. So right now I'm going to put up on the screen a map of human estimation of our immigration out of Africa. And you'll see that somewhere around 200,000 years ago, we were in Africa, and then we started to move out into the world through what is modern day Saudi Arabia, along the coast, throughout Asia, up into Australia. And I'll bring up here Lake Mungo. It's a site in Australia that shows human habitation for at least 40,000 years. This would be the Aborigines. And that this traversal, this going along the coast, we also did at a later date through the north through Siberia when we eventually populated the Americas. And it makes sense. We were beachcombers really to start. And it was once we developed moving more inland as we went. But one thing to note is a lot of this history, a lot of these sites are going to be gone forever, in no small part due to the glacial changes in the not too distant past, that the sea level was at a far different level. And so that the being able to go down to Australia was a lot easier. And a lot of those sites that are along the coast are now technically underwater. And so that much of this is gone, and that we're only really finding the fractional remnants of this, and also through the being able to look at DNA in ancient sites, are we able to kind of map this idea of human migration during this time. But that if it weren't for the sea change, then the amount of sites that would have probably been available would just be nuts. But again, we're dealing with what we have. It shows that human beings, for at least the last 100,000 years, slowly but surely moved out into the world, overtaking those that were already there, meaning, the Denisovans, any of the other humans, Homo erectus, that were still around, the human-like, pre-human, cousins of the humans species, hominid species. It wasn't just these other guys that were out there. It was real deal monsters. If you and I sat in a movie theater, if we were able to bring up actual depictions of the vast majority of these creatures, it would be a fucking monster. It would be something that you would, if you wanted to see in a venue somewhere, it'd be cool. You'd go see it, but it's not like anything that exists today. The cave bear, cave lion, saber-toothed tiger, the giant ground sloth. One of the well-known ones is the woolly mammoth. A multitude of other animals throughout Australia. Some really vicious looking shit. Throughout Africa, throughout Asia. One of my personal favorites is Gigantopithecus. It's from a few million to a few 100,000 years ago, mainly in China. But essentially, think of real life Bigfoot. Pretty cool. Still wish those guys were around. Spoiler, I'm pretty sure they're not. But either way, Gigantopithecus was and is one of my personal favorites. And some of these other creatures, these massive monsters, we had language, but we didn't have written language. We had very simple technologies. Over this period of time, our stone tools went from the Ottawaddle, these very simple, looked like kind of luckily broken rocks, to over time far more refinement. And traditionally, we thought of that something special was happening to man, that we were evolving, that literally new connections and new brain pathways were forming somehow. Don't get me wrong. I understand that there were environmental aspects to our diet, maybe eating more protein, all sorts of things. Definitively over time have a factor. But what I'm saying is that a lot of this isn't so much that because we were violent and because we ate more meat that our brains got bigger and now we rule the world. That when you stop and you think for a moment, that does almost sound a little overly simplistic and silly, but there is a great swath of our understanding and what we believe in this map that if I bring it back up, this map that we warred ourselves through the world and conquered it. And there's reason to kind of look at that because guess what? None of those monsters that you and I we can't see those monsters anymore because our ancestors rid the world of them. Right, wrong, or indifferent. I'm not one of those people who thinks that the world is better off without humans. I like existing. So I understand you have your right to think that, but kindly go fuck yourself. I would rather exist. And so I think that we can find a more in tune with the environment way to live if we look at how we actually came about, where we came from, and that we were hostile with our environment. We did change our environment fundamentally. We did. But I don't see the evidence, and there isn't merely the evidence of this warlike, hyper-aggressive creature that moved across the earth because of its emphasis of violence was able to become the powerhouse it is today. What I see is a narrative of humans moving out and being humans, which are social, complex, interactive creatures, and that over time and iteration and the evolution of language and working together in cooperation, we slowly but surely conquered the world, taking it away from monsters, literal creatures that you and I would want an army to go after. They went after it at night with just each other, hide, sinew, tar, wood, flint, stone, and cunning. That was it. They didn't need anything. They didn't need anything else. They had each other. And that is a big difference. And when we look at it, it's a very big difference from how we think we work now. Is it that we have to follow the right people and that the right set of ideals and we do the right this and that and X, Y, and Z, and that you alone have to figure this out. You have to pull yourself up from your own bootstraps. If you can't figure that out, it's your fault. Well, look, I'm not saying that there isn't responsibility for you, but we came from, it would appear, I'm suggesting, that we come from working together. We didn't conquer the world over 100,000 years being led by kings. We conquered the world working together. Did we have some sort of hierarchy? Was there ritual? Yes, this is where ritual and shamanism and a lot of these things that led to our organizations that we have today, like religion and society, this is where they were birthed. This is where these foundations came about to fill roles for the tribe and the community. And it changes the context if we look at it in that way. We weren't just apes roaming around with sticks. And now a brief word from our non-existent sponsors. Are you lost, confused, like a ship without a rudder? Sounds like you need Tricky Dick Dixon's Alpha Male Academy maggot. Get ready for the toughest, most life-changing experience of your miserable existence. In our Alpha Assertiveness Bootcamp, we're going to beat the manhood right up into you. No excuses. You won't just learn to be a man, you'll become the Alpha. We will push you to your limits with relentless challenges, grueling tests, and emotional abuse techniques. Tough love is so 90s, the new era requires the next level. Our patented no-love technique will make you the man you always knew you could be.
Warning: extreme alpha transformations may result in unintended side effects. Consult your know-it-all spouse and their asshole parents before committing.
And now back to our show, currently in progress. the other narrative, I've heard a stoned ape hypothesis. This is another good one, where that they think that apes started eating mushrooms, and because of the hallucinogenics, they were able to evolve in consciousness. I'm not saying definitively that's not true, but I don't think you need that story when you look at how connected we are. How we were able to conquer the world through cooperative conscious interaction with each other at a level no other organism was able to do. And then that, over time and scale and iteration, adds up to the advancements that led to where we are today. Agriculture and society, but that's the next episode. As amazing as all that stuff is, that is very recent. That is not 200,000 years ago. That is 10,000 years ago. You go 10 times past that, humans were in Africa, or the Middle East, Israel. You go to about somewhere between 40,000 years ago and 30,000 years ago, and pretty much most of the coast, up to including into Europe, up to into Japan, in China, Australia, throughout Asia. Humans were there. Humans were living it up, doing human things. And they started doing more human things. And this is really the transition when we start thinking of these guys as more human, because we start seeing things like representational art, these cave paintings. Most of these things are, again, 30, 40,000 years old. So I'll have a cave painting, and it's happening all around the world. I'll pretty sure I can find it. There's a 40,000-year-old Malaysian cave painting. So this is over in Asia. We can have a 40,000-year-old, roughly, representation in Romania. These are both human. They're very far apart. They're very distant from each other. They're literally tens of thousands of generations apart from each other, but they are human. They are related. We are related to them. And during this time, after all this iteration and this challenge and this advancement, our technology started to improve. And we don't have the wheel. We're not riding on horses. We don't have beasts of burden. It's just us. It's us and whatever we're able to figure out, including clothes, weapons, shelter, practices, meaning things like cooking meat, all sorts of other ways to interact with each other, rituals and things like that, that either make humans work better together, help them feel more in tune with their environment. They were experts in their environment. These brilliant minds we have that we waste on Facebook and TikTok and fucking Minesweeper, these same amazing machines were let loose on prehistoric Earth, and were able to, through active inference, find the patterns, see the patterns in their environment, understand the patterns of their prey, understand the patterns of seasonality, and then using the models of language, express these ideas to one another through narratives, through stories, reinforce these things through rituals, share them through art, transfer the knowledge of making crafts. There was no writing for 100,000 years, but we had tool making for that and way longer. You know why? Because it is learned, and it is not uniquely human. Cultural tool learning, this is in the world. Remember how I had said we're related to other animals? If I show a Caledonian crow, you and I might not think of each other as the same type. You say, oh, what a bird brain, even. We think of them as small brained animals because we believe that the amount of brain matter matters. These things are fucking smart. There's Caledonian crows I would take over some of the fucking managers I've had in my life. They can solve puzzles. They can do all sorts of things. Octopus can solve puzzles, can get themselves out of traps. They're smart. They have a level of processing and thinking that we don't think of. When you say culture, you go, well, that's only human. No, it's not. Culture exists in bonobo apes. It exists in chimps. It exists possibly in whales. How do we know that? These animals have regular processes, rituals, tools that they use, processes that are unique to them, not unlike culture, that they only know through the training of one another. When one person from one troop moves to another, they can transfer that culture over. because these are learned habits, using particular tools in a particular way. That's proto-culture. Cetaceans, whales, the way they interact, their language, it would appear that they have something that is not completely alien from what we understand as culture. That these things that we attribute to as uniquely human, that are special, that come from only society, are most likely aspects of nature that we don't acknowledge because of our use of this over hundreds of thousands of years of our evolution, got us to the point where we were able to conquer the world from monsters, conquer nature in a way, by the most recent times, with great ramifications. But nevertheless, we have, because we told ourselves that story that it was true and we all acted it out. And that's in no small part how we got this far. Quite literally. So here we are talking about the last 100,000 years, and I've already kind of speed rolled up to, so let's just say 40,000 years ago. There's a couple reasons for that. It's not just that it didn't matter in all this time that nothing important happened. It's that there wasn't a whole lot of evidence of what we were doing left. Part reason, as I had said earlier, is that the sea levels have changed. A lot of human habitation that was in our earliest of times is gone. So we just have no way of knowing. From what we did find, we found human burial as early as 100,000 years, probably even earlier. But when we think of ceremonial burial, traditional, more humanish, putting coloring, giving offerings, ochre, putting them in position, putting them with their clothes and things that are tools that could still be useful, that we're implying something. We're putting meaning and reasoning to the practice of putting them into the earth or interring them versus what we did prior, which was, let nature take its course or what have you. And that when I talk about that 40,000 year mark, one of the real reasons we look at that as the beginning of humanity is because that's where we can start telling a story. And that something did seem to change, or at least our ability to leave the remnants of what we were doing, our complexities of the things that we were doing, the quality of the art, the quality of the craftsmanship, Venus figurines, the superior tools, the needlecraft. We're seeing different things come about with more refinement, with greater precision, with the atlatl and various extensions of human understanding compound knowledge. That we're still nomadic, moving around, but there was probably some understanding of seasons and math and stars. There was some type of language to communicate ideas over time, sharing and teaching these crafts, the ability to craft clothing. Without that, the humans that we know, or my ancestors, wouldn't have been able to populate Europe at the time. It was just too cold. It wouldn't have made any sense. They wouldn't be able to do it. And that these technologies that we rolled out started leaving evidence so that we have stories for it. And there's a bunch of different reasons why. There's a bunch of different explanations. There's something called the Young Dryads. There's a reason to believe that our humans as we know it shrunk down to a very small population size. We see that the echoes of that in our DNA, and that something happened in that period that fundamentally changed us to make us us. And what I'm trying to core in here is that I don't think that matters as much. Let's say something happened 40,000 years ago and a gene was turned on, one little gene, and that it was the final catalyst in making you. It doesn't make sense compared to how we look at everything else when it comes to the animal kingdom, which we're a part of. That we don't need to have this special uniqueness puts us above and beyond the rest of nature. We can be unique, but not exceptional, not above and beyond. If we need to believe that, that's because we're enacting a model where we're trying to form our own internal views of things versus maybe dealing with reality as it is. That's a speculation, but fundamentally, what I'm trying to stress here is that our innate nature is to be one with the world. We grew from this. And again, not in this holistic crystals type of way that some people would look down upon. that your hair is your aerials to the cosmos, and that's why bald-headed men are uptight. No, what I'm talking about is that literally your makeup, your psychological makeup, your genetic makeup, everything that makes humans work came from a cooperative millennia of work, and that we are the product of that. And that's what helps bind us and combine us. And that's why we're together in this. And that's why we are not completely apart from everything else in the world. And that our culture, which we think are so amazing, exists out in nature. Things like you like to get fucked up. That's part of nature. You go, what, Steve? Your alcoholic is showing. No, I'm serious. Altering your consciousness is not unique to humans. Animals throughout the animal kingdom do that. Elephants will go back to a particular spot where particular fruits ripen and they get fucked up. You have lemurs that part of a grooming ritual is they take these millipedes that secrete a toxin when they nip them. They nip them and then they go through this grooming ritual. And if you look at it, you can see that these guys, their eyes are rolling in their head. They're getting messed up. This happens throughout the animal kingdom. Rams eating hallucinogenic lichen, up to addiction, to the point where they actually will suffer for it. This is not unique. Altering consciousness, Caledonian crows will like to go down embankments and roofs and spin and get dizzy. Altering consciousness, altering one's state of consciousness is a byproduct of being conscious. It's not a unique human thing. And yes, beer may have changed the world, but it's not unique to humans, meaning the pursuit of it, maybe the manufacture of it, but not the want of it. That's another aspect of what ties us. And again, it makes sense if you see us as being universally combined with everything else in the world. If it feels weird, it's because you have a narrative that tells you otherwise. Now, if the world's going to tell you that we're all interconnected and you need a model that tells you that you're not, you're going to suffer needlessly. You're going to find ways to reinforce your model that is not true, that alienates us. And it's not your fault. It's because that's the model you were loaded with. And that's what I'm talking about, is all this. If you look at humans for all this time, this unbroken chain of human existence, what does that say? That for the vast majority of the time, we were able to work completely together in a world that had nothing to look out for us. It was literally filled with monsters. It was not a gilded road for us. What we did in that period of time is fucking no short of miraculous. It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. And we don't need to have a bunch of different stories about how other animals are not similar to us, about how they're lesser than us, about how certain races are superior to others, about how certain genders are superior to others, about how you are special above and beyond anything other than what you choose to believe. So I guess essentially what I'm trying to get at is that there is a multitude of evidence that shows that humans have been around for a very, very long period of time. One of the pieces is mitochondrial Eve. In case you've heard of it, it's genetically, we're all technically related, including you and I. So I don't care where you are. You're human. You and I are related down to our 8,000 times great-grandmother, meaning 8,000 generations, obviously give or take. I'm ballparking here, given, say, like 20-something years of generation. That this ancestor, this lady, we all came from. We are all related, albeit, yes, distantly, but we're not alien from each other. We need to act alien from each other because of the lessons and the worlds that we live in, because we're creatures of active inference in the extended mind. We have to exist and keep ourselves comfortable within our environment, irrespective of what reality is. Fuck reality. Reality doesn't matter. We're not meant to even take reality in 100% as it is. We're meant to work together cohesively through the environments that we create and sustain and ritual and all the purposes and all those things, because that's what governed us through 100,000 years of us not even knowing. And then we did something special with it to make it work at scale. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying it's slam dunk. I know people are going to argue. They're going to. My personal favorite. I'm looking forward to people who are Ancient Aliens fans, because those are the ones where it's like I don't feel bad being an asshole about it. Because one, don't get me wrong, I I want there to be aliens. I want ancient aliens. I want them. What I believe is important is that we don't fucking need them. We don't need them. It's the same as every other story. We feel we can't explain while how the hell Egypt got to how it was out of nowhere. It feels like it just came out of the sands, literally. It comes from that because we literally acted like there was no other fucking story. We didn't. We didn't know. And so we made up a story using very simple logics. If you look at cave paintings from 35,000 years ago in Europe, the quality, you look at them in Asia, 35,000, 30,000, you see that. And then you look at hieroglyphics and the art of the early Minoans and the Egyptians. You don't need a huge fucking jump. It's close. The quality is there already. These understandings are not necessary. They're necessary to explain a jump that didn't happen. There's a jump because we don't see the causal chain of events of how it came up. And so, being how we are, we make one up because we do not like uncertainty. We need to create a sense of certainty in the story and the narrative because we're creatures of active inference. And that's how we work. And so what I guess I'm saying is that people talk about Machu Picchu and Atlantis and all this stuff, right? That's what's necessary in order to explain the explosion of human thought and evolution, or however you want to narratize it. The point is that there could have been aliens living amongst them. It doesn't matter. We don't need that because all of the precursors of the work, the stonework, the understanding of their environment, the understanding of monitoring how the skies are moving and understanding the correlations between stars and seasons and events that are going on their Earth, because of being creatures of active inference and understanding patterns and narrativizing everything, that they were able to see this. They were able to do this. They were able to share this knowledge, and through time, able to do these manipulations, create these interesting pieces, these sites. They don't need space magic. They don't need any other type of magic. They need us to give them the respect that they're due. And that is what I'm talking about. But fundamentally, I know I can't say with 100% certainty, and get the far fuck away from anyone who says they can say 100% certainty. That's the biggest fucking red flag there is. Get away from them, because they're saying that for them, not you. But what I can say is that I feel that there is a plethora of evidence. I feel that if you go through just the simple wiki pages on everything, I use a lot of Wikipedia, and I know I'm going to get some crap for that, but I do that because it's simple. It's straightforward. You don't have to go through a bunch of hoops. You don't have to have a whole bunch of prior knowledge. And I'm not saying you should, every single time you look at something on Wikipedia, believe it 100% certainty. That's black and white. Don't do that. But what I'm saying is that there's a plethora of knowledge out there that we can utilize that's completely free to help understanding a little bit more about our world and to cross-check and check against things. And they have references there, all sorts of stuff. I think that's important. I think that's key to us trying to make the progress that we need to. But I guess what I'm trying to put in total here is that human evolution, human progression throughout the world in the last couple 100,000 years, from where we went out of Africa into Europe, throughout Asia, crossed the Bering Strait and populated the Americas. Those are all human, just as equally human, just as human as you or I. The difference was they didn't have civilization. That's it. And they function pretty fucking good. And I'm not saying that you get rid of civilization, everything's great. What I'm saying is that a lot of what we working together is a lot stronger, a lot more powerful than the narratives that are told today. And there's reasons for that. That's the important part, is we are more powerful together. We are related. We're in this shit together. We have always been in this shit together. We need to remember that. You need to see that and believe that to be true so that when you experience that as things come into your outside world, from the outside world into you, you can feel that. If you don't feel that, if you feel that you're supposed to be on your own, when shit goes south, you have more anxiety. I turned to drinking. I turned to all sorts of shit because I didn't feel I had anywhere to turn because I felt I was on my own. How I grew up taught me that. Society taught me that. I was weak for looking for help. I wasn't being a man. Those weren't reflections coming from inside me. Those were things that I was adopting, my understanding. When I asked questions, that's how I interpreted it. No one taught me, no one showed me how much alike we were until it was much later in life. A lot of it I had to figure out myself. And that's what we're trying to cut out here. So we're trying to cut out the middleman. You and I, me talking to you directly, we're the same. You go, well, no, we're not. Of course, we're not identical. We're not so different that you could feel offended by me stating that. I'm not offended by you saying you're same to me. I don't even know who you are. You're human. You could have the weirdest fucking ideas. You could vote all sorts of stuff that I would think is nuts. You're still human. We are more alike than not alike. The only thing that's different from us is what we've written in our stupid fucking books. I'm putting mine on the shelf. I don't care. Forget what it's supposed to be. Let's find out what it was. Maybe we can make a new is. Maybe we can find new ways of working together. Maybe we can do all sorts of things. But fundamentally, when I realize that I am not weak for wanting to be with other people, for wanting to have interaction, for being down, being scared, being all these other things that I felt I was supposed to be, create a construct of bravery and strength and smarts and all this other stuff to pull myself out from under it, versus realize that I had to get comfortable with some of the negative things. I had to change myself. And understanding that I came from a long line of very talented, brilliant, masterful creatures that throughout most of the last 8,000 generations, only maybe 100 generations of the last 8,000, do any of our families have any real knowledge of modern style civilization. That's a big difference of where we came from, what's naturally human. Is what naturally human, the 85% of our time, is what's naturally human, this vast majority of shared DNA. There's so much evidence to show that it's ridiculous to think of ourselves as things that are completely alien from everything else in the world. The reason being is because those are from the stories that we wrote. Those are the stories that I'm going to be talking about in the next episode. The next episode, we're going to circle and really dive into the foundation of what society is, why we're different now. Because there's agriculture, there's civilization, there's all the organized religion, all these things that change. What I'm going to be talking about is that there's things of how humans work at scale that are different from just humans working. And I'm not saying that we can't work at scale. I'm not saying that we were meant to only be in this weird little tribal society. I'm saying is that the formulas that we use at scale, to work at scale, are based off of an understanding of what it is to be human that does not match our actual history. Because it's based off of an understanding of what it is to be a human that doesn't match active inference, embodied cognition, extended mind. And those theories do seem to make sense and exist in this world that we're talking about. I know I've been just doing broad strokes, but there's a lot of this that comes from our own internal understandings that come from society, our world. That's why we have to look at an alternate view, get a little bit more road under our tires, right? A little more distance. And then this next episode, we're going to go in depth into scale. What's the difference between old humans, our ancient ancestors, those that were doing the cave painting to our ancestors that started building cities to us now. And then in that one episode after that, the final one, I'm going to button it all up and I'm going to bring it all together and actually talk, what does this mean for you, your feelings? What is active inference, embodied cognition, and extended mind in this framework to you right now? And then we'll keep going from there. Now, I know I did just a quick once over of 100,000 years. I left a lot of information in the show notes and on the visual version. And the reason being is because this is an exploration. If you want to see for yourself, be my guest. There's so much information. There's channel after channel, which I will reference, because if you want to kill some time on YouTube, there's plenty of places to look for this. But what I want you to do is I want you to take from this conversation, the main idea is that there's more than enough evidence out there for you to see for yourself that our history is longer, more complex, and interconnected than maybe you thought of. And I want you to focus on what I'm talking about, which is, what does that mean? That's the interesting part to me. Not all these facts and figures. Believe me, don't get me wrong. Those still cool stuff. But that's not the journey we're trying to take on this one, on this particular podcast. There's plenty of people out there. I would love to share some time and information with them and maybe have a conversation sometime in the future. But for the most part, what I'd like you to do is to take a look, see what you think. How does this differ from what you think you are, where you came from, what your dad, your mom, somebody told you, school, life? What ramifications could that have? Why would things be different? And then in the next episode, we're going to go over some of that. And if you're on the Patreon, we'll have a discussion on the Discord about it. Otherwise, for everybody else, I really hope that you've enjoyed the experience so far. I want to thank you. Please like, subscribe, share, engage. Anything at all will really help, because the nature of this is not a super sexy project. It's not a super content driven. It's not going to get a whole lot of ad revenue. And I'm not really necessarily looking for that. I would like to be able to survive and do this for a living, but I don't need to do it at the expense of the idea. So if you can help me out, I'd fucking appreciate it. I really would. But until the next time, self-generated.